Hi, Zizaran here, and I wanted to make a more in-depth build guide for the Exsanguinate build I'm doing, and I'll try to cover everything like spell slinger and self-cast and everything like that. As per normal, we're going to have a more in-depth skill tree, so you can see if you click the passive skill tree, you will be able to open like multiple trees. Clusters is going to be part of it as well, and you can see that clusters are very, very important for the build. It's actually a large part of your damage, and I do not recommend this build for solo self-found, especially if you don't know what you're doing. It's very, very rough. It's also a fairly expensive build for hardcore. It's a lot easier as a softcore build because there you have a lot more access to damage and you have a lot more access to, well, ignoring your defenses actually. So we'll cover all of that. And for following this build, make sure you use the community fork to follow along. We'll have everything in the description as well. So everything's going to be step by step, and Scion is actually pretty rough normally because you don't really get much damage in the start. And you can see we go like straight up for like basically Relentless and Veteran Soldier, then up to Vanquisher, and after that we go straight up to Sovereignty. It's pretty okay to level, and we actually level with Spell Slinger early. So we'll have like the entire leveling setup in skills, and obviously you don't get Spell Slinger until 24, and you can actually start with Exsanguinate already at 24. You don't need to use both Reap and Exsanguinate. Until then, there's a couple of options. Ground Slam is probably the easiest, just like a standard Ground Slam setup, and you do get Fizz nodes while leveling, so this is okay. You just have to make sure you have some sort of okay weapon. Shattering Steel is okay as well, and some people will level with like Ethereal Knives, but that's probably like the rougher one that requires a lot of twink gear. Now, as soon as we hit 24, we can instantly pick up Exsanguinate, and then at level 28, you'll be able to have Reap. I think pretty early I was able to do 2 4 links, but either way, you could drop a support gem early. The way Spell Slinger works is that it basically reserves the skill and turns it into an aura. This aura will then proc whenever you attack with a wand attack. This could be with something like Frenzy, which is our preferred choice, or if you're playing the Gladiator, you'd be using Kinetic Blast, because there you want to do the bleed explosions from the Ascendancy, and then you need an attack because the spell doesn't bleed, and that's important to know. And because of Spell Slinger, it has like a very, very high reservation at a low level, and the higher you level it, all the way to, I think the highest or best reservation is at level 21 when it only uses 24% base reservation. So if you're maybe wondering why everything isn't linking, maybe your Spell Slinger isn't high enough. And we're also using reservation nodes on the tree to help with the reservation stuff, and that lets it a lot easier to do like a 5 link and a 4 link, for example. And for the skills, we'll have them in order of priority, so you can, if you are running out of mana for whatever reason, you can drop the bottom one. And there's quite a lot to mention for this build, and there's a lot of things that might be strange to a new player. So I get asked a lot, why do we use Spiritual Aid? So what Spiritual Aid does is that it basically converts minion damage to just be generic damage. This doesn't mean you can use the minion damage support gem, because that's a more multiplier. It specifically increases and reductions. So that means that the increased damage we get from our Ascendancy will be just the same as increased damage, or you could also get increased damage on jewels. And this is basically just a good way to get some extra damage early. We're going to be dropping the Spiritual Aid nodes later when we actually have cluster jewels, but obviously they can be pretty expensive and hard to roll. There are other things that are pretty confusing. How does Corrupting Fever work, and when do we use it, and how do we keep it up? So Corrupting Fever is a new gem in Path of Exile, and well, it's sort of similar to Blood Rage in a way, but either way, you activate it and you sacrifice a bunch of life. The one I'm currently using sacrifices 930 life, and it's a pretty big chunk, but what it does is it basically gives you the ability to give Corrupting Blood to enemies. So every hit you do, whether that be from something like Stormbrand, Frenzy, or from our spells, each will add a stack of Corrupting Blood. And this goes to a max of 10 stacks, and it does a lot of damage. Even early on, I was just using it on a 1 link without support gems, and I felt like it helped a lot with the single target. And then later, we're using like Swift Affliction, we're using Brutality, and Efficacy. So when do we use it, and how does it work? So now when I'm playing as a Spell Slinger, I'm actually able to keep this up all the time. And especially on Self-Cast, it'll be no problem to keep it up all the time. But for Spell Slinger, it is a little harder. So how do we do it? What I use is I use Frenzy with greater multiple projectiles and Life Tap. And I also have Flame Dash in that same link with Life Tap. That means that every time I'm right clicking with my frenzy or when I'm flame dashing, I'm using life, and most of the time I'm able to keep it up. And if it drops down, I usually always recast it, but for the most part, unless I'm standing around looting a lot, I will keep it up for the entire duration of the map just by one cast. Leveling Frenzy doesn't really matter because it doesn't increase the mana cost, and keeping a high level Flame Dash is pretty useful because then it will cost more mana. And like I mentioned, Corrupting Fever is also why I've chosen to use Stormrun in the trigger one later. It's just to stack up the Corrupting Blood a little bit faster because every single hit, no matter what it's from, will stack one more. And there's another thing that maybe needs to be explained in this. Petrified Blood, what is it and how does it work? Well, Petrified Blood is basically a way to allow life builds to go low life without being, well, super, you're gonna die instantly. And I'm actually using Petrified Blood on my Spell Slinger. I wasn't planning on using it on Spell Slinger, but I was like, maybe I can drop Rend and go low life and maybe that'll give me a damage increase. So I tried that. And I'm currently trying it. I'm still alive. I probably wouldn't recommend it for hardcore, at least not with like as little gear as I have. It's very, very scary. And basically what Petrified Blood is, that whenever you take a damage from a hit specifically, which means you're very scared of damage over time buffs, obviously we are sort of getting Slayer Overleech, which I'll explain in a second from this. So dots aren't that scary, but they still are. They still are. They are and they aren't. But either way, whenever you're taking damage from a hit, 45% of life loss below half-life is prevented. And then you take that damage, like you actually take more damage over time, but that's over the next 4 seconds. And the way this works is also, it has another line that says life recovery other than Flasks cannot recover life to above low life. This means that you don't actually need to care that much about reserving yourself to low life because it'll never let you go above low life from literally just leeching. It will always keep you at 50%. And this is actually a very important thing for the build, because if you reserve 50% or 51% of your mana, you actually don't get Slayer Overleech. But you basically get Slayer Overleech as long as you reserve 49.9 and less. Slayer Overleech basically means that your leech doesn't stop when you get to full. So that's the really, really cool side effect of Petrified Blood. I am currently using it with a level 4 enhance and anomalous Petrified Blood. This means that I actually have 51% of life loss is prevented, but I take 214% damage over 4 seconds. It's very, very scary to play this on hardcore, because when I take a big hit, my entire life bar will sort of, it looks like it empties. It'll turn like the blood like a darker red, like a coagulated red. And that doesn't mean I'm about to die. It would actually have to, like, you would have to notice the top bar. But if the entire bar is like coagulated, that just means that you are taking larger damage over the next 4 seconds, and you have to out-regen that. So why do we go low life, and what does it give us? Well, it actually gives us Pain Attunement, which for our Exsanguinate is 30% more spell damage on low life. Sadly, this does not work for Corrupting Fever, which would have been very, very strong, and then we 100% would have done it. But it seems to be a pretty good damage increase. I currently also get to use Herald of Purity, which is 12% more damage, and that's really good. And we have the Sentinels as well. They don't really do much, to be honest, but they're there. I also am reserving a level 19 Vitality, and I currently have like 49% reserved or something like that. It's just important to make sure that you don't go exactly to 50 or 51. Now let's take a little bit of a look at my character and how this works. The gear I have right now, it's like okay. I definitely want a lot better gear, and we'll have different gear examples of like low, mid, and end game gear as well. And don't worry too much about low, mid, or end and what that means. It's more about having different options for different price ranges. So low ones would be very cheap, mid ones would be maybe 1 or 2x, and end game gear could be as much as 10 to 20x, right? So it's just to give you guys some options for depending on where you are in the game as a player. Now, if I'm attacking here, you can see that I'm stuck on 2803, which is literally 50% of my life. Whereas I use the Flask, I go to 2866 and I'm no longer low life. It's easy to check this because I'm actually using Laurie's Lantern, so you can see that once I actually go low life, I get the extra Chaos Res. The reason I'm using Laurie's Lantern is that its damage of enemies hitting you is unlucky. And what that means is if an enemy has a big range on their hit, say it'll roll their attack twice. So say it hits for 1,000 and it hits for 100, then it's going to choose, well, you're getting hit for 100. so it's particularly good against lightning damage. To be able to use the 6th thing, I have to use a skill supported by Slinger, have 10% reduced mana restoration. Without that, it would be very hard to do one. You don't need 15%, but if you have 15%, I found I was able to drop some of the Sovereignty nodes, but then you'd probably have to play around with Vitality, because obviously our Sovereignty is affecting our Vitality and how easy it is to reserve things on life as well. So make sure you play around with that, and that's actually pretty easy to fuck up on this build. Another thing that can easily help with mana reservation for this build is Conqueror's Efficiency. So my chest is actually really good. It doesn't have very good prefixes, but the 25% increased effective offering is really good, because our Ascendancy for this build is Gladiator, which is the first thing we ascend, and the other thing is a Necromancer. And you might wonder how this does work. Well, as you see at the top line, your offering skills also affect you. So it's not that we're using any minions and we want to empower them, but we want to make sure that we get extra block. So this means that while I'm clearing, you can see that bone offering goes up, and I have 7862 block. I'm using roomies, and if I don't have a roomies, then I have 7253. I also have Path of the Witch, which is something you want to take when you get around Uberlab. It's a bit of an annoying respec because in the start we have nodes here, and then later we are obviously only coming from here, which is loads of nice spell damage nodes, and obviously spell damage scales the damage we get from Exsanguinate. And now another really strong thing about being a block build is that we can get a block on life shield. You can get this by just getting either a Shaper or a Warlord shield. It can be any item level, and then you just do Harvest, Reforged Life, or Pristine Fossils. This is really good. Obviously you can see this shield is pretty much dog shit, and the only thing I have it for is the life on block. My boots, pretty straightforward, and this was a good way of getting early leech in the build, because there are some other options, like you can get physical damage leech on rings from Delve, you can get physical damage leech on incursion amulets or on elder amulets, I believe. So that's some other sources of leech, and you can get a Doriana's Imitation. I actually have dot multiplier, but you could also, like the like absolute base amulet would most likely be +1 fizz, +1 strength gems, because gem level is huge for this build, and it's actually not that high damage, so you do want as much damage as you can get. But yeah, Doriana's Imitation is actually pretty good. Sadly doesn't have life on it, and I only have like 5.7k, 5.8k life right now, which is kind of scary, especially against dots. For my gloves, you can see here that I'm using Delirium gloves. This is made by an essence of Delirium, and then you can get lucky and get Sucketed Gems, deal more damage at the same time as getting life. These are pretty great gloves, and I'm very happy with them. If you have Reap in them when you're still spell slinging Reap, you could get +1 AoE crafted on the gloves, but just having Corrupting Fever in here is really nice as well. I have a Vulnerability ring. These can be found in Delve, or they can be crafted on Warlord rings. I found this one in Delve, and I got very lucky with it. For a 1, the best thing you can get would be something like +1 spell, +1 fizz, and then dot multiplier, and an open suffix for trigger socketed spell when you use the skill. And I have a high level bone offering, and if you don't have that, you have to have cast 1 damage taken, desecrate bone offering. Also remember, flasks are very important for every build in PoE. Jade Flask and Quartz will give you a lot of defense, and obviously having a Granite as well if you don't have roomies. Quicksilver, and then when we are low life, there's actually a little trick we can do. We can have instant recovery when on low life, which, well, this is. So this will not be instant, and we can further buff that by 60% life recovery when used on low life. This is actually quite nice, so you can consider doing that. Now, when do you go low life and why? So you can go low life pretty much as soon as you have leech. I would never under any circumstance play without leech. I probably wouldn't even play without life on block. It's very scary and favors softcore a lot more. I think it's very easy to die. If you press things like Corrupting Fever at the same time you're taking damage, you can easily literally kill yourself. So very scary and something you want to avoid. So what about using Reap with Spellslinger instead of going low life? Well, I did that for a very long time, and it is perfectly fine. The downside with Reap is that it doesn't get blood charges when you are spellslinging it. However, there is something you can do to actually get that. And what I did was I had Reap with Unleash. Now, the only time I would use this was like basically things that are alone. So really tanky bosses like the Conquerors and stuff like that. Then at the start of the fight, I will do my Unleash Reap, and that will give me 4 of the charges. And then I get a big damage boost for single target. So that was pretty good for that, but I do feel like I have quite a bit more damage on low life. It's just a lot scarier. A thing to mention for like crafting things like a good imbued one, I haven't been able to do one so far, but remember we just discovered the new recipe, which is basically 40 gem quality with a tag. If I vendor those with a white wand, that is going to give me a wand with +1 physical spell skill gems. And then augment and regal, and I'm obviously hoping to get the damage over time suffix or the physical damage over time prefix. And when I don't, what I've been doing is I've been crafting physical damage over time multiplier for 2 alchemies in the crafting bench, and then using Reforge, it looks like this, Reforge or rare, much more likely to receive the same modifier type. The Pantheon for the build is, I've been using Brine King to help a little bit with the stun stuff, and upgrading Corruptor Ediac, which is Forbidden Woods by bringing in the Divine Vessel, is actually a pretty good upgrade as well. Same with Peruna the Challenger, which is the Atoll map boss that really helps a little bit with stun issues on the build. Before I went low life, I had the Soul of Relikesh, but for low life, I had Soul of Risthatha. And for this build on the Bandits, we kill all of them. And good annoyance for the build is Command of Steel is by far the best, but you could also do Vitality Extraction until the endgame. And on this build, especially on softcore, something that could be really, really good is actually dropping the trigger wand entirely. And you could actually, if you want to be really YOLO, you could do 2 cold iron points. This is very, very scary. You're obviously not spell slinging at this point because you're using a dagger. You're giving up life on block and you're giving up your trigger, but you would do pretty large damage with +6 with 2 cold iron points. More likely is that you're going to use a cold iron point and a good +1 shield with lots of spell damage. That would be pretty good as well, and you can still get Bone Offering from cast when damage taken. Would not recommend this on hardcore, however, because having that Bone Offering up all the time is very important. Another thing that is absolutely huge for the build, and the main reason we go Scion, is that you have access to 2 pretty good cluster jewel spots without too much work. Having both of those jewels with 2 large spell clusters with Conjured Wall and Mage Hunter, that gives us the largest spell block, but we get so much damage. If you're able to get 4 medium cluster jewels with Rend and Brush with Death, it's very, very, very strong. There are some other okay nodes like Student of Decay and Phlebotomist or something. And remember, if you run into any issues, there's going to be loads of things in the notes that should answer every single question you have. If not, run by my stream, come ask some questions, but please make sure you check the notes section first. I hope you guys enjoyed this in-depth guide for Exsanguinate and, well, Reap as well. And let's do a quick checklist at the end for the problems we want to solve for the builds. Are there too many gems to equip? I didn't have any gem issues at any point, I think. It was pretty easy. The only thing I struggled with sometimes was like having vulnerability or getting life tap on an extra thing, but it was pretty like non-important. As far as mana issues, obviously we're spell slinging, which never has any mana issues, and we're using life for a lot of it, so mana is pretty much a non-existent issue for this build. Useful level uniques is basically just things like +1 physical spell skill gems on either, well, blue or rare items. There's not really any like crazy unique that stands out to me for particularly leveling, just your normal stuff like Gold Rim, etc. And for like leech and sustain and stuff, obviously it's like a block build with life on block, and we basically get Slayer over leech, so it's a pretty nice sustain build and should be a really good bosser. As for financial hurdles, this is obviously a fairly meta build. A lot of people are playing this, and physical damage over time is very popular right now, so all the cluster jewels and a lot of the things you want for the build are fairly expensive, so keep that in mind. There's another thing you can do, which is particularly for hardcore for extra defense, and what I would really like to do endgame, and I would like to get a Glorious Vanity of Doriani, which gives me Corrupted Soul, which is 15% life as extra energy shield, and 50% of damage taken bypasses my energy shield. What I want to do next is get a shield that is a hybrid shield with ES on block and life on block. That would actually give me a really, really decent defense, as well as splitting the damage between the life and energy shield. So hopefully I should have like a decent amount of life, like 2 or 3k, and also a large amount of energy shield. Either way, I hope you guys enjoyed this in-depth build guide. Good luck in Ultimatum. I hope you get a lot of loot. Run by my stream if you have any questions. And as always, sub if you like the video, but more importantly, try to die less than I do.